Welcome back to Jerusalem Minute. I am Josh Haston, correspondent for JNS News. And Alex Trayman is on the video screen behind me. He is all the way in Washington, D.C., covering the visit of Prime Minister Netanyahu to Washington before his speech before a joint session of Congress. We'll also be meeting with President Biden, as well as Vice President Harris and former President Donald Trump. Alex, it's good to see you very far away, about 5,000 miles away in Washington.
Josh, good to see you as well.
So a lot has changed from the time you took off to the time you landed. President Joe Biden announcing via X that he is no longer going to be running for president on the Democratic ticket, fully endorsing Kamala Harris to run versus President Donald Trump this November. Let's start by talking about that.
Well, I think that for a lot of people, this is not a big surprise. Maybe the bigger surprise was that the entire Democratic establishment was covering for Joe Biden for so long. To me, it seemed obvious even 4 years ago that Biden was not the man that he used to be years back. All you have to do is look at videos of him as a senator or even early on in his term as a vice president to see that he was in mental decline. And that said, the idea that you had a president of the United States, the leader of the free world, in mental decline for a significant period, 4 years, I think it's very difficult to understand how that was even possible. Biden's now out of the race. Kamala Harris, the presumptive nominee, but it's not clear if she will be the nominee by the time we get to the convention. So buckle your seatbelts. It's been a ride, and it's going to be an additional ride. Trump just went through this assassination attempt. He seems to be soaring in the polls. He doesn't even know who he's running against at this time. And in a way, I think it does make things better for Israel because it takes a lot of the focus off of what Israel's doing inside Gaza right now, with everybody in the media focused on the presidential race in the United States.
And nevertheless, the show must go on, and Prime Minister Netanyahu is on his way to D.C. right now, getting ready for his speech in front of a joint house. And you wrote a very, very thorough analysis on jns.org titled The Implications and Audiences of Netanyahu's Address to Congress. And you broke it down very, very specifically. Essentially, number one, this seems, based on what you wrote yesterday, to be the epitome, the top, the highest possible speech, most influential, most important speech for Netanyahu in so many different aspects. This is the fourth time, more than any other leader, foreign leader, addressing Congress. There's a lot of things going into play here. So let's just, if you can, just give a little background, and then let's break it down.
Sure. As you mentioned, I think Netanyahu now is going to be doing this speech before Congress more than any other foreign leader in history, including Winston Churchill. I'm not sure that too many people are thinking about that or celebrating it, but it's a high stakes meeting for Netanyahu, who's been much maligned both at home in Israel and abroad in the media. People have been comparing him in headlines to Sinwar, to Nasrallah. Chuck Schumer saying that Netanyahu was one of the four problems in the Middle East. And yet Netanyahu has been a senior statesman for 16 years as prime minister, going on 17 years, the longest serving prime minister in Israeli history. He's won more elections than any other prime minister, and is known for being an outstanding diplomat, statesman, speaker, and has transformed the state of Israel from a developed economy into a first world economy. People seem to forget that because politics during a war has put a lot of pressure on Netanyahu. And this is Netanyahu's opportunity to demonstrate once again to Israelis and to those abroad that he's the indispensable man.
So let's start with the Israelis, since we are here based in Jerusalem. What does this speech mean to the Israeli public, that audience who will be listening with bated breath?
Well, obviously Netanyahu has gone through these 5 consecutive election cycles in less than 6 years. You can argue that Netanyahu won all of them, but it takes its toll on the public. In a democracy, you want to have elections, you want them to be spread out. You don't want to keep having them every 5 minutes. And the opposition has really taken to slamming Netanyahu. It became clear last summer during the judicial reforms that Netanyahu proposed that, it wasn't only the opposition who was against him, it was also the courts, who was also the upper echelons of Terry. It was also the Foreign Service. It's certainly the media. And you see now the protests that you had last summer and during these election seasons, they're restarting themselves, this time connected also to the war, connected to the inability to return the remaining hostages home. And for Netanyahu, he's got to prove that even though you had this massive security failure on October 7th, that he's been conducting the war in a way that's effective, that is in line with what most Israelis would want. And there's a lot of calls now for Netanyahu to step down. Netanyahu doesn't want to step down. His coalition seems fairly sturdy, even though the media tries to present it as unstable. And this is an opportunity for Netanyahu to demonstrate again why he is the prime minister of Israel, why none of the other candidates, be it Benny Gantz or Naftali Bennett or Avigdor Lieberman or Gideon Sa'ar, any of them, that they don't hold a candle next to Netanyahu, especially when it comes to these types of international engagements like this speech in Congress.
So that's the Israeli public. And now you have over there, you have Biden, a president who is now not stepping down immediately, but he's not running. There are others who suggest he should step down right now. Kamala Harris, and then you have President Trump. What do you think those three will be listening for come Wednesday when Netanyahu addresses Congress?
Well, not only are they going to be listening to Netanyahu's speech, but they are going to be meeting personally and privately with Prime Minister Netanyahu. So let's take them one at a time. So if you take Joe Biden, for example, so this meeting becomes less important than it would have while Biden was still in the race. I think that it's going to be a very cordial meeting. I would imagine that Netanyahu will speak very kindly of Biden and his support for Israel for the coming years, but under the understanding that he's not going to be the president soon. So I would imagine that this is a less pressured meeting than it might have been before. At the same time, Biden may want to demonstrate that he's still in command and in charge. So he might put a lot of pressure on Netanyahu. The meeting's supposed to be on Tuesday. The speech to Congress is supposed to be on Wednesday. And that gives Netanyahu a bit of the last word. Whatever happens on Tuesday, Netanyahu may be able to pivot in his speech on Wednesday in order to mitigate or respond to some of the pressure or the damage that might be done in the meeting. Now, the meeting with Kamala Harris takes on a much more important status, both for Netanyahu and for Harris. Harris, she's been highly criticized. People feel that she may not be ready for the top post in the country. This is an opportunity for her to sit together with one of the leaders of the free world, one who's very experienced. He's met with presidents dating back, including Obama and Biden and Trump and others. He knows how to handle himself in these meetings. So this is an opportunity for Harris to show that she can handle herself in these meetings. Now, Harris is known to be less sentimental toward Israel than Biden, who even Biden last week still called himself a Zionist. I don't think that Kamala Harris would call herself a Zionist. So this is going to be an opportunity for her to try to prove herself on the world stage. We'll see if she pressures Netanyahu or not. And then you talked about Trump. And obviously, Netanyahu and Trump have accomplished so much together, arguably more than any duo of president and prime minister for the state of Israel. We remember that the Trump administration moved the embassy to Jerusalem. They recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. They recognize Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. Those Golan Heights right now are being pummeled by Hezbollah. They also ruled under Mike Pompeo what's called the Pompeo Doctrine, that settlements are not necessarily illegal according to Israeli law. And I know we'll talk about that a little bit more with the ICJ. So Trump and Netanyahu have accomplished a lot together. Trump defunded the Palestinian Authority to a great degree. He defunded UNESCO, UNRWA, a lot of these organizations that are doing the bidding of the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. And Trump pulled out of the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, and that withheld significant funding to Iran as it tries to pursue nuclear weapons and as it funds these terror proxies across the Middle East. And yet, for all they accomplished, in the last year or so, you see that the relationship between Trump and Netanyahu soured. Trump was upset that Israel didn't participate in the targeted assassination of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, and also Trump was very upset that Netanyahu caved into international pressure when Biden apparently won the election. Netanyahu was holding out and holding out and holding out until there were headlines in CNN, New York Times, elsewhere, and Netanyahu had no choice but to congratulate Biden as the new president of the United States. You can understand why Netanyahu did that. In fact, doing that was correct because Biden did become the president of the United States. But now Netanyahu sees that Trump might be the president again. He knows that he was able to work well with Trump, and he's trying to repair that relationship. So this meeting would be an important step in trying to repair the relationship in case Trump does become the president. And momentum's behind Trump right now, so there's a good likelihood that that would be the case. And Netanyahu's chomping at the bit for the opportunity to work with Trump again. So repairing that relationship, very important.
And finally, let's get to the Middle East here in terms of what Netanyahu potentially could say this coming Wednesday. You have, on one hand, the Iranians and all of their proxies who will be paying close attention. And on the other hand, you have the Saudis. Last week, we mentioned that the Saudis, it's very unlikely that they would be willing, certainly not now with the President Biden saying he's not going to be running for re-election, not willing to attempt a normalization deal with Israel. They'll still be listening intently, as will Iran and all of their proxies, including Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, who we're going to talk about in just a second. But let's have your take on what this speech means to the rest of the Middle East, specifically Iran and company and the Saudis.
Well, the Iranians and their proxies are watching. They want to see if Netanyahu is strong. They want to see if he looks weak. They want to see if it appears that the United States is squarely behind Netanyahu as he conducts this war. They're also looking with bated breath to see who will be the president of the United States come November. They're taking calculations on that basis. For example, if Trump was going to be president, you heard Trump just in his speech at the RNC, he basically threatened that anybody that's still holding American hostages had better let them go before he becomes the president, or there will be significant consequences. And it's a very similar situation to what you had in 1979 when there was a takeover of the American embassy in Iran under Jimmy Carter as he was running for re-election. And then you saw that the Iranians left the embassy on the very day that Ronald Reagan was to be inaugurated, right? So they're looking to see, who will be the president. They're looking to see who's strong in the Middle East, and that could affect their calculations as to whether they stand down, as to whether they ramp up, and try to get something over with, let's say, before the elections. So they're watching very carefully. The entire world is watching this, particularly in the Middle East. And when you talk about the Saudis and the Emiratis and Bahrain and the other in the region, and we've talked about this before, Israel is transforming the Middle East. There's two clear steps to define, difficult steps to implement. That's defeat the terrorists and to normalize with the moderates. Netanyahu has proven that he can normalize, that he can go towards peace. Netanyahu probably won a Nobel Peace Prize, and Donald Trump probably should have won a Nobel Peace Prize together with the brave leaders of the Emiratis and Bahrain for signing these historic normalization agreements. Of course, they didn't get a Nobel Peace Prize. Barack Obama got an aspirational Nobel Prize in the first year when he became president, even though he destabilized the Middle East. And a lot of the situation that we're in today is because of the policies that he implemented. And Joe Biden is a carryover from Obama, together with Anthony Blinken and Jake Sullivan and some of the other holdovers from the Obama administration, have sent, in many ways, have sent the Middle East into war. When Netanyahu went to Congress in 2015, he did so specifically to oppose Obama's entering into the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. It was a very bold step. It probably angered any Democrats. It soured the relationship between Netanyahu and Obama, which has recovered to this day. And part of Israel hurting for bipartisan support is because of that speech. And yet at the same time, that speech to Congress was one of the foundational elements of the Abraham Accords. even in the moments after that speech was made, calls were made to senior Israeli officials from the Emirates, from Bahrain, who noted that Israel was willing to stand up not only for itself, but for the entire Middle East against an American president. And that laid the groundwork in many ways for the conversations, which would later lead to the Abraham Accords. So when you talked about the Saudis normalizing with Israel, they're not going to normalize with Israel before this election. They want to see who's going to be the president. They also want to know who's going to be the prime minister of Israel. Netanyahu lost the prime ministership after the fourth election, even though electorally he had way more votes than his opponents, but they kicked him out and Bennett became the prime minister. These countries in the Middle East, they are ruled for many years at a time, in fact, decades at a time, and they want to know who they're doing deals with. With the United States and Israel turning over leadership, the policies shift from one side to the other very quickly. So, everybody's looking closely to see who's strong, who's weak, who's going to be the leaders of Israel, who's going to be the leaders of the United States.
Folks, go check out the entire article, The Implications and Audiences of Netanyahu's Address to Congress, by Alex Strayman, who has a busy week ahead of them in Washington, D.C. But Alex, as you're over there, Israel continues to be on a war, as the prime minister says, on 7 different fronts. And just the other day, the Houthis, an Iranian proxy over there in Yemen, got themselves involved by directly striking Israel via a drone attack in which an Israeli was murdered. This was on Thursday. In response, just the other day, the Israeli Air Force conducted its first ever strikes on Yemen. The operation was dubbed Operation Long Arm. This happened on Saturday, targeting the Houthi-controlled port of Hodeidah to prevent weapons imports and cause financial damage. The Houthis claim to have launched ballistic missiles at Israel, with one intercepted by Israel's Arrow 3 on Sunday. This happened near Eilat. Prime Minister Netanyahu responded to the Houthi attack. And let's go ahead and play that clip of the Prime Minister.
From the beginning of the war, I made it clear that Israel will act against all those who attack us. This is why earlier today, I asked the Israeli cabinet to back my decision to strike against the Houthi targets in Yemen. The port that was targeted is not an innocent port. It's used as the entry point for weapons that are supplied by Iran to its Houthi terrorist proxies. The Houthis have used those weapons to attack Israel, to attack Arab states in the region, to attack many others.
So again, you have the drone strike on Tel Aviv. You have Israel's response. Also newsworthy, the fact that the Houthis continue to attack in the Red Sea, attacking an Israeli tanker carrying vegetable oil from Russia to China multiple times in a 24-hour period. Netanyahu says, we will not tolerate attacks by the Houthis. And in fact, they've actually fired, I think, several hundred projectiles at Israel since the beginning of the war, since October the 7th. Alex, your reaction to everything going on here in terms of the Houthis getting involved directly by striking the heart of Tel Aviv?
I think that you just said it properly, is that the Houthis from October 7th not only have been attacking Israel using ballistic missiles, using cruise missiles, using explosive-laden drones. This, by the way, is not the first drone that hit inside Israel. There was a drone very early on in the war that hit a kindergarten in Eilat. Fortunately, nobody was in the kindergarten when it hit. But this attack with the drone on Saturday night was the first attack that the Houthis did that actually killed an Israeli. That was an Iranian-made long-range drone, a Sana drone, and that exploded just 100 meters or so from the branch office of the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv. And it sent shrapnel through windows, and one person was killed. Several other people were injured. And, unfortunately, that was the red line. But you have to ask yourself, why wasn't the red lines already crossed? You're firing ballistic missiles. And as you mentioned, also, these have been interrupting international trade in the Red Sea, which is causing damage commercially to the entire world. I mean, the Suez Canal is one of the world's major commercial waterways. It basically cuts off travel from China, which is the main manufacturer of goods around the world, to Europe. And containers have been having to go all the way around the southern tip of Africa in order to reach Europe. It's caused tremendous increase in prices. for everybody, which is just another form of inflation. And nobody's done much about it. The United States had done some symbolic attacks inside Yemen. And what Israel did in response was also a symbolic attack, but I think it had a lot of meaning. Number one, it created an extraordinary fire because it was an attack on a major fuel depot. So the fire was something unbelievable. But the way in which Israel conducted the attack, I think, is very, very noteworthy. They sent F-35s, they sent F-15s. They had to use refueler planes. This is an attack that was conducted very far away from Israeli territory and about as far away as Iran is from the state of Israel. So, people have been concerned as to whether Israel would be able to conduct aerial strikes against Iran. This was a very significant signal that, yes, Israel can attack very far from its borders and can hit its targets with precision, can avoid any kind of missile defense. You see that Israel may or may not have been able to fly over Saudi airspace in order to conduct this attack. So believe me, the Iranians and everybody else watching what Israel did, the Houthis watching, and we'll see if the Houthis continue to be part of the fight. But yes, we see Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, all of them attacking Israel. And as Netanyahu said, this is a fight that's being fought on multiple fronts.
Yeah, certainly a message to Iran. They should take note of that. The Houthis also saying they will continue these types of attacks in the future. At the same time, Israel is being attacked legally. And I would go as far as to say, as the International Court of Justice and their ruling on Friday, they're essentially serving as the legal arm to Hamas in the midst of a war, which Israel didn't want, which Israel was forced to take on after the October 7th massacre. Despite all of that, the world is turned upside down. Not really surprising. This is a UN entity here. The International Court of Justice issuing a non-binding opinion declaring Israeli so-called occupation of Judea and Samaria is unlawful, stating that Israeli communities, or they call them settlements, in Judea and Samaria, they say West Bank, and parts of Jerusalem violate international law and amount to annexation. The court criticized Israel's policies, including settlement expansion, infrastructure development, as creating irreversible effects and entrenching Israeli control. So you do have this ICJ ruling. On one hand, it is non-binding. On the other hand, it definitely gets the attention of those who are seeking to harm Israel, those who oppose Israeli policies, specifically when it comes to Judea and Samaria. Of course, our prime minister rejecting the ruling entirely, and many other politicians here in Israel doing the same, saying that the ruling disregards Israel's historical and legal rights to our ancestral and biblical heartland. Your take on the ICJ ruling?
Well, I think that it gets to the crux of what the international community thinks, which is that Israel doesn't have any rights to live in Judea and Samaria, that Jews do not have the right to live in the only biblical province in the world called Judea. Jews are Jews because they come from Judea. All the stories of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, all the forefathers took place in Judea and Samaria. And they don't want Jewish presence to be in these places. They want the only province in the world called Judea to be Judenrein, as the Germans called it, or free from Jews. They're happy that Palestinians can live inside Israel and can get equal rights. They don't want a single Jew to live in Judea. And I think you understand now through this ruling that everything that the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, the UN Security Council, UNESCO, UNRWA, all of these agencies that have tremendous financial backing from the free world, including the United States, including Europe, is all focused on trying to minimize Israel's presence in the land of Israel, to try to get Israel to turn over its land to the Palestinians for the creation of a state. Even after the Palestinians just committed the worst massacre in Israeli history on October 7th, they think that terrorism was justified. Okay, that's what everybody thinks. It's a perversion of justice. It's a perversion of morality. Israel has every single right to have Jews living in Judea and Samaria. And the question is going to be, will Israel finally take the steps that maybe it needs to take to to eliminate this question of occupation, right? Because Judea and Samaria, what's called as the West Bank, Israel hasn't applied formal sovereignty over that territory, even though it defeated the Jordanians in 1967. They were the ones who were illegally occupying Judea and Samaria from 48 to 67. Israel liberated that land from Jordan, and Israel even signed a peace treaty with Jordan, 48 to 67. Jordan gave up all claims to that territory. Will Israel take the step that it should have taken in 1967 and formally annex the territories in Judea and Samaria? I think this is the major question that Israel's going to have to answer in the coming years.
Yeah, and a lot of leaders from Judea and Samaria saying as a result of the ICJ ruling, Israel should in fact go forward finally after all these years and apply sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. So Alex, you have a lot of leaders in Judea and Samaria actually as a result of the ICJ ruling saying that now is the time finally to declare sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. And if you take a look at the 80-page document, it talks about the occupied Palestinian territories time and time again. And as you and I both know, there's never been a state of Palestine in the history of the world. And based on what happened in the Knesset this past week, it looks like there will not be a so-called Palestinian state. The Knesset overwhelmingly voted to reject the establishment of a PA state. There was a similar vote earlier in the year where they voted against the so-called Palestinians unilaterally declaring a state. And now they're saying, regardless if it's unilateral or not, the vote, I believe, was 69 to 8 or 9, and the only parties who voted against are those of the Arabs and some members of labor. Yair Lapid apparently walked out before the vote was cast. But the Knesset motion conclusion says the following: supporting Palestinian statehood at this time would reward terrorism and serve to encourage Hamas and its supporters. Israel's enemies will interpret it as the victorious outcome of the massacre perpetrated on October the 7th and a precursor to the conquest by jihadist Islamism of the entire Middle East. Again, this is not a binding, this is a declaration. It's not legal, it's not binding, but nevertheless, vast majority of the Knesset gathers and says no to the establishment of a PA state.
Yeah, there's a few important elements there. So first is the number of Knesset members that voted for and against. You mentioned that about 68 voted in favor. Only 9 voted against. Those 9 are Arab Party Knesset members. So you ask, well, if only 9 voted against, then you should have had 111 Knesset members vote in favor. So the coalition, as well as Benny Gantz, who had left the coalition, they voted in favor of the resolution. But you mentioned Yair Lapid walked out. They walked out not because they support Palestinian statehood, but they didn't want to give this type of victory to Netanyahu. They don't want Netanyahu to be seen as the one who's championing the push in Israel against the Palestinian state, finally closing the door on the ill-fated Oslo Accords, which have caused thousands of deaths in Judea and Samaria, finally closing the door on this peace process. So they didn't want to give Netanyahu that victory. So that's why they avoided the vote, but they did not vote against it. And I think that that's a clear indication that they are not in support of a Palestinian state. The timing of the vote is important. The vote was conducted specifically in the days leading up to Netanyahu's trip to the United States and his speech to Congress. I would imagine that Netanyahu may well mention the vote that just took place here because he wants it to be very clear that it's not him who's opposing Palestinian statehood. You know, international community, the media, Biden administration, they say that Netanyahu is the problem because Netanyahu is the one blocking the creation of a Palestinian state within the state of Israel. And Netanyahu wants it to be clear that he's representing the entirety of the Israeli public when he opposes the creation of a Palestinian state. So timing's important. The text is important. And you see today that wars are fought not only on the physical battlefield, but also very much on the political and the diplomatic battlefields.
There you have it, folks. That's all the time we have for today. You, Alex Trayman, there with the background of the U.S. Treasury in Washington, D.C., as he is covering the visit of Prime Minister Netanyahu to Washington for top-level meetings and also his address this coming Wednesday to a joint House of Congress. Alex, have a meaningful experience there. We'll be watching your work on jns.org, checking out the articles of your coverage of the Netanyahu visit. Thanks very much for taking the time. I know you're busy over there.
Well, Josh, I'm sure we're going to have a lot to talk about next week as well after the meetings and after the speech.
No doubt about that. You've been listening to Jerusalem Minute here on JNS TV. Big shout out to Ryan Lifshitz for everything he does behind the cameras here. Make sure you watch all of the amazing programming offered by JNS on JNS TV and at jns.org. My name is Josh Haston here in Jerusalem, the eternal capital of the state of Israel and the Jewish people. Continue to pray for the well-being of our IDF soldiers who are down protecting us on 7 fronts, folks, on 7 fronts. Hopefully they will continue to be safe. Have a great week, everybody, and we'll talk to you. We'll have a lot to discuss next week on Jerusalem Minute. Take care.